afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. It's the 14th of September on Thursday, and we have our regular Thursday guest, David Kuo, founder of the Smart Investor, coming to us out of Singapore. Good afternoon, David. Hope you're well.
Selamat tengah hari, Brian. Apa kabar?
Kabar baik. Now, before we delve into getting your insights, David, we're going to take a look and see how markets across the region have performed. We're going to start with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is at 26,212. It's up 1.11%. Ethereum is at 1,615. It's up 1.57%. Now, looking across to regional stock markets, we start with Singapore, where you're at. The Straits Times Index is up 0.52%. Bursa Malaysia, KLCI, is down 0.14%. Shanghai is up marginally 0.03%. The ASX All Ordinaries is up 0.59%. The Nikkei is up 1.43%. The Hang Seng is down 0.33%. And running up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is up just over 1% at 1.02%. David, your view on market performance in the first half of the day?
Well, I would say in general, it is pretty positive. And I think everybody, you and I and the rest of the world were waiting for those inflation numbers coming out from America. And as it turned out, it was kind of okay. And so consequently, I think people are a little bit more positive now about the stock market. What will happen tomorrow? I have no idea, Brian. But for the moment, everybody seems to be reasonably sanguine about the stock market. And they think that maybe interest rates might have reached, I wouldn't say peaked, but they're probably sort of unlikely to go much higher from now. I mean, if we think about America, I mean, interest rates have gone up, 525 basis points so far. It's been a bit of a shock to the system, but I think people are saying that maybe we are closer to the end than we think.
Now, David, then moving along from that, there's quite a few things happening around the tech sector. Now, the first thing is obviously Apple has done a product launch, but then China has claimed that iPhone has had a security issue, and that's obviously potentially going to impact their sales. What is your view on that?
Well, this is why we're on BizTech Asia, isn't it? I mean, this is your forte. This is your speciality, Brian. So whatever I say, I expect to get some pushback from you. But I would say when you have a look at the timing of this, it couldn't have been worse for Apple. And I'm pretty sure that the Chinese authorities knew that there was going to be a product launch. Everybody knew there was going to be a product launch. So they came up with this story that maybe there were some security concerns about the iPhone. I've never heard of this ever before. I don't think anybody has ever heard of it. But China says that simply because of that, they are asking, well, they're telling the people who work in government offices that they shouldn't bring their iPhones into their workplace. Apple denies this, as you would expect, and Apple says there's nothing wrong. But nevertheless, it still went ahead with the launch, and it launched the iPhone 15 now. I think there were 4 models in total. So they've got the iPhone 15, the iPhone 15 Plus, the iPhone 15 Pro, and I think there's the iPhone 15 Max, I think, yeah. And whether or not that will get people around the world to go and change their iPhones, I'm not entirely sure. I looked at the phone and I thought it doesn't really look too different to the one I have, which is probably about sort of 4 generations older, and it seems to work pretty well. But interestingly enough, they haven't actually sort of raised the price of the lower 3 models, but the top end model, they have increased the price. And the market wasn't entirely happy with the increase in price. They think that Apple should really have increased the price across the board. But that's shareholders talking. Shareholders just want profits, whereas consumers want some kind of price stability. They don't want to have to keep on whipping out their credit cards and pay for more expensive phones each time a new model comes out, Brian.
David, this all smacks of protectionism rather than technical issues. And speaking of protectionism, we've got the same thing done to the Chinese in Europe, because basically the European Union is probing subsidies provided by China in EV production. Because after all, I think the shock to the system in a motor show last week in Europe was how far ahead the Chinese are in the EV space.
Yeah, you're right, Brian. I mean, you got to be very careful about this protectionism. I mean, if we can just take one step back to the iPhone again, to the Apple's iPhone. Let's not forget that many Chinese manufacturers are manufacturing or are part of the supply chain in the manufacture of iPhones. And so, if China hurls a rotten tomato at Apple and says that your product has some security concerns and iPhone sales were to drop. I mean, who is that going to hurt? I mean, sure, it'll hurt Apple, but at the same time, it'll hurt the manufacturers in China. And of course, Chinese manufacturing employs a lot of people, and so it could actually sort of come back and bite themselves on the nose. And so we move now to electric vehicles. Europe is now saying that electric vehicles produced in China may be the beneficiary of unfair subsidies, and so therefore they want to do a probe into this and find out how much subsidies are being provided either directly or indirectly to the Chinese EV manufacturers. And I have to say, on my last trip to London, and I had a look at the number of electric vehicles in the cars, there were a lot of Chinese electric vehicles there. Of course, the UK is not part of Europe anymore, sad to say, but Europe knows that they have a big manufacturing base for electric vehicles, for vehicles in general, and they don't want to find that their own car manufacturing industry is going to be hamstrung in some way because of these cheaper Chinese exports coming in. China says it will retaliate if this were to happen. And my point about this is that when we are investors, sure, we look at numbers, we look at all sorts of things, but we cannot ignore geopolitical risks these days. And that is going to be a very big issue for people when they are looking at balance sheets, when they're looking at profit loss accounts. They're going to say, what is going to happen tomorrow? How is geopolitical risk going to affect a company's ability to generate revenues and produce profits, Brian?
Now, on a different note, David, we talk about valuations. SoftBank is floating ARM, and the valuation at 54 billion seems by some quarters to be a rather rich. What's your take on this IPO?
I tell you what, the UK must be kicking itself, for allowing ARM ever to be sold to SoftBank. If only ARM had remained on the UK stock market, that company would have continued to participate in the demand for chips, and of course now the demand for artificial intelligence capable chips. But effectively, when you have a look at ARM, 54 billion, is that rich? Yeah, I mean, it's almost on the same valuation as NVIDIA. Do they kind of do the same thing? Well, probably not, because ARM designs chips. ARM doesn't manufacture chips. So there are lots of companies out there who require chip designs that may be capable of artificial intelligence. And they'll go to a company like ARM and say, can you get your guys with pointy hats on and design us a chip that will enable my refrigerator to tell me when I'm going to be running out of a particular product, and place an order for me so that those products can actually be delivered to my home. So is the valuation high? I would say yes. But is it justified? I don't know. We won't know until a bit later on, Brian.
Now, on that note, David, thank you very much for your insights. Thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, we've been speaking to David Kuo, founder of the Smart Investor, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out our conversation on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.